Kia ora, and welcome to another Sharp Kinane software tutorial. My name is David Kinane. Today we're looking at Fusion360. In this particular tutorial we're going to be looking at the interface of Fusion360 and how to set up a very simple model. So let's get right into it. Today we're going to look at Fusion360. You need to know first of all that there are some options for you to download this. If you are a secondary school student or a secondary school teacher, you can apply for the education of license and that works really well for you. If you are up to a year 8 teacher or student, you can apply for the personal hobby use, and so you have to download Fusion for 360 for personal use option, and you can find that at the bottom of the Fusion 360 page when you go to Autodesk. So you just can download the free trial, and you can see all the buy Fusion options down here, but it's right down the bottom for you to find this additional Fusion 360 offerings, and so that's where you can get this from. And if you download the personal and hobby use, you get full functionality of the entire Fusion 360 suite. The only problem is that you can only have 10 active projects at any one time. And when we jump into the interface, I'll show you what that means and how you can manage it. When you open up Fusion 360 for the first time, this is the interface. So before we start creating any content, we need to orient ourselves around the interface and make sure that we understand where everything is. It's a very simple layout, and once you start digging into Fusion 360, you can do quite complex things. So let's orient ourselves around the workspace to find out what the workflow will be and how we can use the tools to help us create and modify our drawings. In the first place, we have the actual work plane itself. This is a two-dimensional plane on which we draw our initial two-dimensional sketches, and then we use the various tools to create the shapes and modify the shapes that allow us to build our 3D models that we could then export to our various tools that we want to have then make the designs. If you're used to Tinkercad, over in the top right hand side over here you've got the orientation cube, and you can see that the Z-axis is the blue axis, the X-axis is the red axis, and the Y-axis is the green axis, and that helps us orient ourselves here. So we can use this tool here to, just as we can in Tinkercad, to orient ourselves around the work plane, and you can see the square here, and everything pivots around the origin. So that allows us to do that, but most often we're going to be using the orientation tools in the toolbar at the bottom down here. We've got the free orbit tool, which has got a drop down option here, and we can do the constrained orbit and the free orbit. And again, if you just click and drag with your mouse button, we can inspect our tool, the objects that we've been creating through the orbit tool, and everything orbits around the origin. So it's important, if you're creating something, you try and create it at the origin or over the origin so that it's easy for you to inspect your object. The further you are away from the origin, the more difficult it can be to actually look at your object. Next, we've got the pan tool, which just simply allows us to move in a straight line, a linear motion left and right and up and down. And then we have the zoom tool, which allows us to zoom in and out. And that's the next thing we need to look at is the grid down here. And when we start creating content, we can see these grid lines will conform to either 5mm or 1mm or more multiples measurement sizes for the objects that we're creating. Whilst we're down at the bottom of the screen here, we've got the timeline. And as we add different elements to our drawing, this timeline will populate, and this cursor here allows us to wipe along the timeline. And using the timeline is a very useful way of seeing the sequence in which we created content. And in a moment I will show you a model that I've already created and how we can use the timeline. And coming back to the timeline and coming back to the various elements that you've created enables you to edit and make changes to the complete model without having to undo or redo the whole model. You can just edit elements of it. Up at the top here we've got the main toolbar, and for our purposes we're going to be looking at the create functions underneath here and the modify functions. You just need to know that you've got the select, insert, inspect, construct and assemble options here, but for the purposes of this tutorial series we're just going to look at the contents of these two toolbars, and if you click on here you can see everything that's underneath there and everything that's underneath here. Note that some of these tools have their own keyboard shortcut, and the more you use those the better. So we're going to be using Q and F a lot, and E, and that's E for extrude over here, hole, etc. And we're going to work our way through all of those. So that really is the quick overview of the interface, and the more you use Fusion360, the more this interface and the tools of navigating around it become more self-apparent to you. Now we're going to look at how we can manage our models once we start to create them. This view gives us the widest possible work area to work with on the screen, but over on the top left hand side here we've got the waffle, and if we click on that we come to our home page. I can see I'm logged in. We can look at all our projects, and I've organized all the projects that I'm working with into different projects, and inside those are different files. As part of the hobby license, you're only allowed to have 10 active or editable projects going at the same time. I've got many more projects on the go and models in here than I have than the 10, but you can see here that I've got 4 editable models out of 10 on the go, and so I've got 6 more models I can make, and we can manage this. So if we click into this project I've got going here, you can see I've switched these to read only, so they're not editable, and that's how I can manage my content. But let's open up the laundry rack bracket here, and it loads up, and I'm just going to close this to give myself some more space. And what I want you to look at along here is the timeline. This is a really good example of how this model was constructed. We can see here that I drew and then extruded, drew, and as I go across each timeline here you can see on the model the bits that are highlighted that I extruded, and the various bits that I did. So we can see some filleting that I did here. And importantly here you can see the mirroring that I did, and we'll get into that in a later tutorial. And each one of these elements here is editable and unwindable, so we can go all the way back through. So for example, when I printed this off on my 3D printer, let's just orient this around so we can see what we're looking at. When I printed this off, from the center line to this first vertical here, it should have been 75 millimeters, and I initially made it 61 millimeters. So if we come over to here, it's possible to modify the entire model without redrawing it once you notice you've made a mistake or you think you need to adapt to the design. So if I right click on here, I can click on edit sketch, and the whole sketch opens up, and you can only see half of it here because I have mirrored it, and I'll show you how to do that later on. This model here, this dimension here is 75 millimeters, which is the model's been turned upside down. But if I click on this and change that back to 61 millimeters, the model changes. I can finish my sketch, and the whole model updates, and that measurement there now is 61 millimeters. But look, the whole model is still ready to print. Everything else that came after that was adapted to meet that new change. So I'm going to come back into here and change this back because it does need to be 75 millimeters. Now it's time to start constructing content. And to do that, the first thing we need to do is start over here in the Create toolbar, and we want to create. Obviously, we can't make anything 3D until we've sketched something, so we start over here with the Sketch tool. So we're going to click on this, and the first thing that comes up is it asks you to select the plane that you want to work on. It doesn't really matter which plane you're working on because you can orient objects around. I tend to click on this bottom plane here, so I'm going to click on this, and it switches straight to a two-dimensional view. And now you can see that the dimensions have now been added. So if I roll into this, we can see here that these are now in 5 millimeter sections. So each one of these squares now represents a millimeter, and that grid helps us plan things out. You'll notice over on the create function here that we've got some tools here. We've got the line tool, we've got the 2-point rectangle, we've got the circle, we've got the fit point spline, we've got the mirror function, and we've got the sketch dimension, which is great for orienting content, and I'll show you how to use that all in a moment. But for the first instance, let's just simply create a 2-point rectangle. So I'm going to click on that tool here. I'm going to start at the origin, and I'm just going to draw out 2 points. And you'll notice that we've got some dimensions on there. One is highlighted green and the other one is highlighted grey. I haven't clicked anything, I've just let my mouse go. And I'm going to put in the dimensions that I want. So let's, for example, say we want this to be 20, let's make it 20 millimeters long. And I want to now switch to, I want to set that to 20 millimeters, and I want to switch to the 14 millimeter dimension over there. I'm going to make it 15. To do that, to move there, I'm not going to move my mouse, I'm not going to do anything. I'm going to click on the tab key, and it now highlights this one to be green, and it means it's editable, and I'm going to type in 15 for that. And now I'm happy with those dimensions. If I wanted to go back to the 20, I could tab again. So just keep using the tab key to tab between the two dimensions to set them. Once I'm happy with my dimensions, I can click enter, and it is set. You know when Fusion360 is content that you've got an actual plane that's editable, it's on the same plane, it's on the same dimension. It goes the enclosed area goes blue, and that is now ready to have a three-dimensional plane added to it. So we can now finish the sketch. We click up here on finish sketch, and here's our object. So now if we wanted to inspect this, we can use the orient tool, so we can see it's on the plane, it has no dimensions in the third dimension, and we now need to give this some kind of three-dimensional property. To do that, I'm going to use first of my shortcut keys. I'm going to use the E key, which is extrude. Click on E, and because there's only one plane for us to look at, we don't have to select the plane we want to work with. And I'm going to, again, you can see the dimension is highlighted in green. I'm going to type in the number 5 to make it a 5 millimeter dimension. Happy with that, and I'm going to press the return button to set that feature. And now we have a three-dimensional object created in Fusion360. And I think for this tutorial we'll stop there. In the next one we're going to obviously look in more detail at the create functions, so we can actually do some proper modeling, and we'll use the line tool, and we'll use some of the modify tools as well. Thank you for watching this Sharp Canane tutorial. Until the next one, ka kite anō.